Martin Luther King III obviously is the son of Martin Luther King Jr. and is the president and CEO of the King Center, which is designed and has the mission of continuing the legacy of Dr. King, a legacy of education, a legacy of nonviolence, of literacy, and of activism in all the best ways. Truly a legacy of transformation. As we all know, Dr. King has touched all of us indirectly and directly, forever altering the landscape of our country and the world for that matter. And it's wonderful to have you here today. Just a little bit more about Martin. He's motivated audiences literally around the world, from Mississippi to Mozambique, in his continued quest for equality and justice for all people. A human rights advocate, his messages and initiatives are all rooted within the tenets of nonviolent conflict resolution. As I mentioned earlier, today he serves as the president and CEO of the King Center. He's also the founding president and CEO of Realizing the Dream, a national nonprofit with an international vision to carry on the important work embodying the legacies of his parents. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
We are also thrilled to have Bernice King joining us as well, Coretta and Dr. King's daughter. And Bernice is also very actively involved in continuing the legacy of her parents. She's nationally and internationally known as one of the most powerful, motivating, and life-changing orators and speakers. You guys have pretty good genes in terms of oration and speaking ability. We can, any Toastmasters folks in the audience, could probably give a few tips. Bernice leaves her audiences spellbound and challenged. Born the youngest daughter of the late Dr. King and Coretta Scott King, Bernice began her oratorical journey when she spoke in her mother's stead, this is interesting, at the United Nations at the young age of 17, pretty extraordinary. And over the years, she too has had the opportunity to speak around the world. She's a graduate of Spelman College, a Bachelor of Arts degree in Psychology and a Master's of Divinity and Doctorate of Law degrees from Emory University. She served as a law clerk in the Fulton County Juvenile Court System, and she has appeared on a number of incredible platforms, not the least of which is Bet Talk and, of course, Oprah. So thank you so much for being here today. Very much appreciated. So we'd like to make this interactive, and we spoke a little bit beforehand, so hopefully if the two of you have some questions for us, we'll turn this on its ear a little bit and feel free, because a big part of their trip here today and the King Center's executive team, who has also joined us, hi everybody, is really how to bring the King legacy and the King Center into the 21st century, leveraging technologies that simply were not available at the time that Dr. King and Coretta initially started the civil rights movement in the United States. So wanted to start with just a straightforward question. What brings you to Silicon Valley, and what were you hoping to accomplish on this trip?
Well, excuse my voice. I'm getting over a cold, but let me first say how honored that we are to be here as we approach the King holiday. This year will be the 25th observance of the federal holiday. Now, we in the King family have observed the holiday really since 1969. Our father was killed in '68. April 4th, and my mother and a team began the King Center in 1968, and so we started observing the holiday really in 1969, but the federal holiday was established and signed into law in 1983 by President Ronald Reagan, and the first holiday was observed in '86. So now 25 years later, we are poised to observe this holiday which comes on the third Monday of every January. So we're here because you already said really why we're here. Frankly. So you took, you actually took what I was going to say, but that's all right. I'm gonna give you a pass.
Anyone else want to? So not good at this.
But no, in all seriousness, you actually capsulized it and made it easier. We really are here because of a couple of folks. One, Sarah Ross, who some of you may know, and a number of folks that we've been in touch with. We talked about developing a social media platform for the King Center for the 21st century. While we have existed for over 40 years, teaching and training people in how to live together without destroying either person or property, we have not even scratched the surface in regard to using technology effectively to really teach and train people in what we call Kingian nonviolence. There are 6 steps and principles to nonviolence that are really very simple. And if our nation and world would begin to embrace this philosophy, we would create a far better nation. Our dad used to say that in terms of technology, you're going to help me with the quote. You know I'm going to get it wrong. The essence of the quote is we can swim the seas like fish. We can go out into the stratosphere. We can do all kind of wonderful things, but humankind still doesn't know how to get along. And it was a profound statement, made over 45 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago, that one of the quotes that he talked about. So the reality, though, is, again, as I say, if we were to embrace that philosophy, and our objective is to make this message available to as many people in the world, to give particularly young people an alternative. Because we live in a society that is so, I think we've moved to some levels that are dangerous. Some people used to say the pendulum swings one way and it goes in one direction and then at some point it'll return. Well, we've been going in a direction for a long time and have not yet returned to some of the values that perhaps we need to embrace. So while we are not those who will beat anyone over the head and tell you this is what you must do, we certainly can share a perspective, because my dad and mom taught us as children, number one, to love ourselves, to love our families, to love our communities, and to love God. And, again, I'm not trying to tell anybody that's what you should do. Now, she's a preacher, so she may tell you that. But I'm just telling you what worked in our household. And, I think we came out all right. We're not totally dysfunctional, maybe a little bit, but, all of us in our society have a little bit of a few challenges. I apologize. It's late in the day, so I don't mean to be so.
Yeah, 5:30.
But in all seriousness, one of the characteristics of our father that most people don't know was that he was tremendously humorous. And he was always on stage, and so he always presented a very serious image, which was certainly part of who he was. But when he was with us, when he was with his colleagues, he let his hair down, and I mean, he was quite funny. I mean, I used to wonder, even as a child, some of the things that they were saying, because their life experiences were so potentially damaging. And Jeff, I apologize for talking so long.
No, please. That's why you're here.
Preachers, but
please.
I think they had to make light of what was going on because at any moment they could have been killed. And of course, ultimately, he did make the ultimate sacrifice by giving his life for the least of these God's children, sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. And but Dad and his team, I mean, some of the things I was like, I mean, as I listened, as I got older, I said, now they're laughing about things that aren't necessarily funny, but in the context of how they told the jokes, they were funny. I think, when you go through certain levels of trauma in your life, you have to find some way, some outlet for that trauma not to take you out, because our dad at 39 years old, I think his heart was the age of a 70 or 75-year-old man. That's the kind of stress that he was living under all of his life. And although he was 39 years old, after they did the autopsy and all that, we found that out. I know I've deviated. I apologize, but
No, by all means.
I don't even know if I answered your question. Let me see.
You did. You did. Absolutely.
Okay.
So let me ask you a follow-up question in terms of the role of technology. How do you think your dad's journey and the civil rights movement would have been any different had social media and platforms like those that exist today existed during his time?
My goodness, we'd been free a long time ago. No, I'm joking. But I think that if this kind of technology existed within his life, if you remember, and excuse me again, journalists nothing was instant. I mean, if something was going on in the world, it would take a day or two for the world to find out about it, as opposed to instant. That's one of the things. I think that the message that we are trying to get out today, that I think people know at a surface level, would be certainly more, not just more available, but perhaps more would be embracing it. And some of the work that we are trying to do, maybe we would have no no need for. I do have a cold, so I'm all right.
That's okay.
Let me say let me say one final thing, and I know Bernice would have a perspective that I think folks would want to hear. I think that my father and his team, and it's important to understand team, while they understood, they did exercises to teach and train when nonviolent. For example, everybody couldn't go through what they went through, being beaten and that kind of thing. So they would tell folks, if you're not equipped, because people are going to maybe spit on you, they're going to do all kinds of, and some folks just, aren't equipped for that, and that's understandable, but they still could play a role. So they had to train themselves to go through an endurance process of people really mistreating you, denigrating you, treating you the worst that you could ever be treated. And it didn't just happen in a vacuum. They had a very severe or specific strategic plan. Now, we all know that anything that we want to be successful, there are incidents where people just accidentally do things, but more times than not, when we're successful, it's because you have a strategic plan, you work your plan, and you plan your work. And our dad did that. So, did you want to add anything?
Just to add that probably what was a 14 and close to a half-year movement would have been condensed to probably 2 years in terms of the progress that they made in that time period, just by having all of the platforms that exist today. I think it also would have galvanized, for lack of a better word, a group of disciples in what they were teaching people in, and helping people to understand mobilizing and organizing. Because if you think about the movement, really it was a massive mobilization and organization task. And you had a group of women who really began the movement. When you study the correct history, Daddy was propelled to the leadership, but there was a lot of stuff that happened prior to Rosa Parks sitting on the bus. There had been several young ladies who had been in that position, but the women had been talking about boycotting these buses, and the women went and mimeographed at that time these leaflets, 50,000 leaflets, and ended up handing them out. Just imagine if they did that in a matter of December I think they mimeographed them on the 2nd.
Yeah.
And they passed them out on the 3rd. And the boycott began on the 5th, which was intended to be a day boycott. And it ended up being 381 days. So fast forward to now, transformation would be much quicker.
And the other thing is, realistically, our dad knew he was only going to be here for a short span of time. When you think about it, 1955 to 68 is a very short time. Now, he prepared himself for his destination and journey throughout his life in his earlier years from an educational standpoint. But once he got to Montgomery in 1953, 52, about 55, he was called on the stage. And from 55 to 68, which is a very short span of time, a Civil Rights Act was passed, a Voting Rights Act was passed, fair housing legislation. So, and a number of other campaigns occurred. And that's really, in a scheme of time, just a very short amount of time to create and transform a nation. And in fact, because of what he and his team did, we know that most or many of the social movements around our world came out of the modern civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement. I mean, there are just a number of things that got impetus because of that movement. If you looked at what happened in China and Tiananmen Square when folks were singing "We Shall Overcome," you look at the Berlin Wall coming down. A lot of that is a result of what people of color, along with many good brothers and sisters of all persuasions, who stood up against injustice, because Dad always told us injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I can't be what I ought to be until you're what you ought to be. You can't be what you ought to be until I'm what I ought to be, because our destinies are tied together.
You mentioned a word just now, insofar as your father helped transform the trajectory, the path of this country and the world. And transformation is something we talk about at LinkedIn. It's something that attracts a lot of people to Silicon Valley. The ability to leverage technology to transform the world in a positive and lasting way. Sometimes people say, how can one person make a difference? They have the will, they have the ideas, they may have the vision, but they say, I'm just one person. How can I make a difference? Your dad was one person. He made an extraordinary difference. What do you think were the qualities, what do you think were the practices that he manifested that made that possible?
Well, I think the first thing is there was a congruency between what he was trying to do and what he believed. I think sometimes what happens, sometimes the internal can sabotage the external acts that you take. So in the first place, it was the congruency and with the message. Because as Martin said, this was a man who stood on his porch after the home was bombed where our mother and our late sister was. And the men had guns and rifles, and they were ready to do some serious damage. And just the words that he spoke out of his mouth that day caused what is a natural instinct. We need to defend ourselves. It just caused these people to put their weapons down and to really trust what he was saying. And so I think it's because it emanated from him. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think he was disciplined. It takes discipline and focus when you're trying to change something, because especially today, I mean, there's so many things that are attractive and you can get off track because of that and get distracted. But he was incredibly disciplined and focused. I remember the statement he made at some point as he moved toward speaking about the war in Vietnam. He said, I don't care if nobody embraces nonviolence. If I'm the lone voice, I'm going to embrace it. So that was an incredibly disciplined and focused person. The third quality was that he understood that it wasn't about him, and therefore he knew how to empower people around him. I mean, he had an incredible ability to bring all kind of people to the table. who perhaps would not come to a table. Wouldn't that be true?
That's
The
it,
kind of staff he
definitely.
had.
Yeah.
But it was the way that he was able to kind of see the gifts of each individual and utilize those and create a synergy. And even if they had disagreements as they did, it was just amazing that they were able to, Andy Young says it all the time, it's amazing we got anything done because they did have these differences behind the closed doors. And so building that kind of team and understanding it's not about you and you're not in it alone. You know, he was I think he was an organizer, a great organizer. I mean, right after the boycott began, he knew that, okay, we got to put something in place to keep this thing going. And so even though you are one person, you know, whatever you're determined to do, if you're focused, you're disciplined, if you're congruent with what you're trying to do, you make the right connections, because that's the incredible part about the whole social media platform and where we are today in terms of the communications modes, is that you can find like-minded people. And he drew that, and that's how they were able to transform the world. So, and there are other things that, of course, you can add. He was incredibly prepared, because you have to be prepared.
I'd like to invite folks to come up to the mic if they have some questions. I have a few more, but please start coming up to the mic. Thank you. Cold remedies. That's very. Actually, you know what?
I'm gonna use that soon.
That's the.
Thank you.
That's like the perfect segue for the next question, Addie. Thank you. I'm serious. So my next question was going to be about compassion, and Addie's bringing up cold medicine.
That's another quality. Yes.
So I think part of the extraordinary legacy of your dad's work is compassion. Mm-hmm. And the way we sometimes talk about compassion here and managing compassionately is walking a mile in the other person's shoes, to take the time to see the world through their eyes before you assume nefarious or ill intention. And it can make all the difference in terms of trying to achieve a shared objective. One of the things that's interesting is we spend time learning about managing compassionately is people find it's very easy to be compassionate with those you respect and you admire and you care for. Call it conditional compassion. But it's really hard when you're confronted with someone who you're not on the same page with. And that's what he faced every day. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about compassion and what compassion meant to him and how he practiced compassion to the extent that he did in such a way that he ultimately changed the world.
I'll give you one example. I don't know if I'd call it compassion, but I guess I would say, I believe it was Birmingham, where the jailers, the guards in the jail, in the Birmingham jail, and you may know that in '63 our dad wrote a very profound letter, the letter from the Birmingham jail, and while they were in jail, the jailers were mistreating them. I mean, they didn't, you know, they treated blacks just as second-class citizens. And, you know, Dad, this is a humorous example. It doesn't necessarily get to compassion, but in a sense it does. So somehow they began talking about what the guards were making. And it was, you know, like $3 an hour or something, or whatever. It was very minimal. Might have been less than that, $2. So, you know, of course, they said, well, you know, you all ought to be marching with us. You ought to be demonstrating. Now, my point is, somebody is mistreating you. And, you know, they're doubting you. But the point is, even though they were being mistreated by the guards, they still felt that the guards had a job to do and that they needed to be paid an adequate wage in life. And to me, that's, you know, that's a form of compassion. Now, Dad had an incredible, unusual, and one of the sermons he preached about the compassion. Oftentimes he preached about it. I think one of his greatest gifts was that he could extract the good out of people. He didn't see the evil. I mean, he knew it existed because it's in the nature of some of us as human beings, I guess. But he never focused on that. He always saw if you had 5% good, that's what he tuned into. And it was as if he could extract that from the other individual. And I think even in his messaging, while you know, it was, I guess to some degree, when you operate from a premise of love, and he really was talking about what he entitled agape love, a love that is totally unselfish and seeks nothing in return. You love someone if they're old, young, rich, poor, black, white, Native American, Latino, Hispanic, Asian, African, no matter who they are, you love them, and you're not looking for anything in return. That's the kind of love that he practiced. And quite frankly, again, if our nation and world was able to tune in and chime in more to that level of love, then we could probably resolve just about every problem that exists. And, you know, it was hard as a child for me to understand a man of love being killed. Now, intellectually, I came to some different conclusions, we probably as a family, as we began to understand why some assumed that our father was a real threat. But the fact is, a man who never did harm, never really, if he could criticize, it was constructive. It was never the kind of criticism that would denigrate someone, no matter who it was. For example, as opposed to calling someone an enemy, maybe the word adversary. You know, we just we may disagree, and he often said we have to learn how to disagree, and he lived this way without being disagreeable, and continue to move forward. So, all of those are some of the tenets, I think, of the kind of unusual compassion that he had, and that he presented to the nation and world, and to those who followed him. Now, let me say this final thing. One of my father's lieutenants, our father's lieutenant, said something very profound to us one day. His name is, he's deceased now also, Reverend Hosea Williams. In Atlanta, we have something called Hosea Feed the Hungry, and every day his daughter's carrying out Hosea Williams' work. Hosea was quite a character. He was an interesting man for those who might know the history. But I was in his office one day, and he had a picture of our dad behind him. And he said, "This man taught me so much." And he started crying. Tears came down, started running down his eyes. He said he conquered the love of wealth and the fear of death. And when you think about that, if you are not afraid, number one, you don't care. I mean, in our society, it's hard because we're inundated with things. But if you really don't care about things, about wealth, and then you're not afraid to die, you virtually are unstoppable. So someone in your ideals. So someone has to, or believes, okay, we're gonna have to kill this force. And quite frankly, intellectually, because Dad was gunned down by an assassin's bullet, in a real sense, it launched his legacy onto a different trajectory. It put it on a different trajectory. I mean, for example, well, I don't know if I should say that because you all think I don't have any sense at all. But you all may think that anyway, but no. I mean, for example, if Martin Luther King had gotten hit by a bus, it wouldn't be the same thing, you know. You know what I mean? You understand what I'm saying? I mean, well, what happened to Dr. King? Got hit by a bus. Well, but because he was shot, I mean, it was like, oh my God, you know, it's a very powerful thing. And the thing that those forces of evil were trying to attempt, or were attempting to accomplish, were actually, they heightened a level. I'm not sure that I'm explaining this right, but it created a heightened level of a legacy that while yes, you've killed a man, you've hurt Bernice and I and my mom and my sister, my late sister and my brother terribly. But, quite frankly, we lost a father and my mom lost a husband, but the nation and world gained a message that is constantly put out in the world. And we believe that your industry can help us continue to get this out here, this message more and more and more, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. Again, I'd like to invite anyone who, there we go. We got a question right now from Krista.
I have two questions. So one, I know Bernice has a Twitter account. I'm kind of curious what other social media outlets you're using or what you're more interested in trying to use more. And also the second part of the question is, have you reconnected with any interesting people or people who were touched by your father that you would have never otherwise encountered or heard those stories through some of the new mediums that are out there?
Yes, I have a fan page on Facebook, but it's listed under Be a King instead of Bernice King. Are there any others?
Would you ask her?
No. I was asking, were there any others? Yeah. Yeah. She works with me, and she's on LinkedIn. Correct?
We can help with your profile if you want. We'll have some volunteers in the audience for you. Let us know if you need any help.
Okay.
But I think, does that answer the second part of the question? I would like to obviously utilize the rest that are applicable to me, because I think that institutionally we have a responsibility to move this message globally. But then the real people have to emerge as well, which is Martin, myself. I'm not sure if Dexter wants to do that. And I think that's going to be important as well. And he's a little bit older than me, of course, and he was really born in the baby boomer generation. I'm kind of on that edge. So I have a little edge to me. So I'm just a little ahead of the game because of that. But it's something that we obviously both want and do enjoy. In terms of the connections, I don't know if I've made, because mine is a fan page, I haven't made a connection necessarily with anyone out of my past, but I have been able to connect to people who've said they want to hear more from me. They want me to have a presence, and I've shied away from it. Even on a fan page, which is not as personal and private as some of the personal pages. But I'm trying to get to a place where I can really be active consistently. Like I think we may have sent how many tweets? Very few, correct? I'm sorry. Oh, okay, yeah.
She was tweeting somebody right there.
She was tweeting somebody, exactly. And I have to get used to it.
How many have you sent? Few, she said.
No, it's, she helps with it, People like us have to have help.
How would you mentioned earlier, one of the reasons for the trip and one of the things you'd like to see is Silicon Valley as an industry promoting some of the things that you're trying to promote through the center, through your father's legacy. Anything specific that you'd like to see, one, and then two, one of the reasons we exist, part of our vision, our mission, is to create opportunities for people, specifically to create economic opportunities for people. And would love if you could also touch upon that in a way where we could leverage LinkedIn and this platform to further promote some of the things that you feel are so important.
Let me start with a couple of things. First of all, just to give a perspective, because the last part of what you stated brings something to mind, and that is that our dad's last campaign before his death was a campaign for economic empowerment. Now, he was talking about a number of things that some may be supportive of, but some may not. One of those things was a guaranteed annual income. And today we call it
Living wage.
a living wage, yes. So, I mean, he was talking about that 45 years ago. And that's part of what probably caused him to be killed, because he was talking about how we utilize the wealth, you know, how we distribute wealth. Not necessarily taking someone's money from them and giving it to someone else, but how wealth is utilized. So my point is, he was dealing with an economic model that certainly would have been enhanced by today, or even then. It didn't come to fruition. Today we're still trying to create opportunities for people, but of course we don't have as strong of a trained workforce as we should. You know, I think, you know, and this is one perspective, that we neglected in our society a segment of the population in urban America as it relates to education. Certainly African Americans, Latinos, and poor whites. We just kind of say, oh, we don't care if they get educated as a society. I'm talking about the United States now. And so we left folks behind. So a lot of folks are just kind of out there. The other thing is, other nations understood the notion of getting educated, and so they have capable, which is good, trained workforces to do some of, or many of those jobs. And so now we've got to play catch up to some degree. And maybe entrepreneurship is one of the mechanisms that might help us get beyond the crisis that we're in today with a very, very bad economy. And we've got to figure out how to, you know, foster and create new opportunities. So I think certainly our dad would have been focused on that. But going back to the King Center, retooling the institution, creating the kind of exhibits. Our parents are enshrined, or their crypts are at the King Center, and people come from around the world to visit us in Atlanta. But we are in the process of developing the kind of exhibits that are so amazing. Our exhibits are not where they need to be today. You know, with holographic imaging and all of the technology that exists today, we can create all kinds of experiences so that when people come to the center to pay their respects and they leave, they're like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something more to help change the world, because we've not yet achieved. Some people thought that the dream and vision of Martin Luther King Jr. was achieved in the election of President Obama. Certainly that was a significant milestone in our nation, and for the world, quite frankly, the election of the president. But that was not the fulfillment of the dream, because our dad used to say that we've got to find a way to eradicate things that he called were the triple evils. He said poverty was one, racism was one, and militarism. If you look at the only area where we've made significant strides, and we still got work to do, we aren't there yet, is in race. But in relationship to poverty and militarism, we're at an epidemic levels, and it's getting worse. So we're clearly not doing enough as a society to address these issues in the wealthiest nation on the planet. Now, it's wonderful. Thank God that many have now chosen to, through life, they've accumulated a lot of wealth, and they're going to give it back to causes. I think that the effort by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett is phenomenal, and others are coming on board, and there'll be all kinds of things. That's wonderful. But it seems to me that, you know, all of us have to do a little bit more. And and I know I'm getting all off message. You asked me something specific, and I'm going all over the world.
That's okay.
But, you know, well, anyway, I'm almost finished. Just bear with me a few more minutes. But I think that what we are trying to do as it relates to the King Center and I guess the King Legacy is create the kind of foundational institution. Some people perhaps here have visited the center. So that, as I say, when you have this experience, you have this education, this informational experience, this exposure to nonviolence, that people go to their communities and are capable of, we want people to be able to teach and train others in the philosophy of nonviolence. I mean, if you would, maybe it's an interesting characterization, creating multitudes of a nonviolent army, because we as a society have got to do better, because man's or humankind's inhumanity to humankind is wiping us out. And we are a much better nation and a much better world than the behavior that we exhibit. But I think we've got to tune into that. We've got to find a way to tune into that again and extract the good out of people, even those who disagree with us. Some of the things that I was involved in over the last couple of years, we had an opportunity to take, you know, Dad's message to a few places, India, Bosnia, Sri Lanka, Kenya, where there was conflict over the last 2 years, and Israel. You know, it was very interesting to be able to talk to Palestinians and Israelis about the philosophy of nonviolence. And, you know, while folks are sort of saying, look, we got to do something, this is crazy the way that we find ourselves having to live. So at least that the message, my point is the message does resonate. And, you know, Bosnia was fighting between 90 and 95. So I had an opportunity to sit down with Bosnians, Serbs, Croatians, and talk to young people who went to school. And they, you know, when I went to Bosnia a couple of years ago, in America, I understood the issue of race and segregation. But to see Bosnians who looked the same, I couldn't necessarily tell the difference, but they certainly were different ethnic groups. But, you know, it was kind of interesting for me to share my experience. Well, in America, you know, only thing I could share, which I think they heard, was, you know, we as a society can continue to fight one another and never achieve a goal or an objective, or we can look at it differently. I said, look, you know, at 10 years old, my dad was gunned down. At 16 years old, my grandmother was gunned down. I said, so my father was gunned down by a white person, my grandmother by a black person. I could have been bitter and hated black folk and white folk. Just, you know, I hate all y'all. But, you know, I said, I'm thankful because I had an example and the model of love. And I said, I had to learn, you have to dislike the evil act but still love the individual. And I said, even in this context where, you know, Bosnians and Croats and Serbs and all of this killing took place, somebody has to have sense enough to cut off the chain of violence and say, how do we create a better Bosnia for all Bosnians? Even though, you know, these kids, they did not necessarily kill the loved ones, but some of their relatives may have. It's a very sad situation, but it's hard to do. And, you know, even our nation, it's hard for us to forgive. I mean, we harbor and are hostile, and we want to get revenge. You know, I think back to, well, I didn't come to talk about politics, so I'll stay out of it. But, you know, you have to wonder if things that we do sometimes make sense. And we can't outshoot everybody. I mean, at some point, you just got to stop the shooting, stop the madness, stop the killing, stop the violence. And I'm always hopeful. I'm not confident, I'm certainly not confident clearly that we've learned this message. Many of us who have an ideal point of view certainly are promoting it and will continue to promote it. And there will be people who will hear this message. And one day, I believe our society will embrace it, but we are not anywhere near there yet. I know I've gone all over the world, but I apologize, but hopefully I said something that made sense to somebody.
Absolutely. So another question?
Okay. There's still an undercurrent of a threat of violence in our current political discourse now, looking at the last presidential election and the lead up to the healthcare reform. How can we have debates with people we're not going to agree with and have a process that moves us all forward without the threat of violence lurking in the background? What can we do?
Keep hope alive. No, I'm just. I think we always have to engage in dialogue regardless. For example, the president could take a position and end up not getting anything done. I mean, he had to moderate some of his positions to keep the nation moving forward. And I do think that there is a leadership that will evolve, that has to take positions. Our dad used to say that are neither safe nor popular nor politic, but we must take positions because our consciences tell us they are right. And people have to be willing to stand on a conviction of truth and righteousness. And the political arena doesn't allow that. I mean, the nature of politics is called the art of compromise. And for example, there are many people who, I think people, as we look back over administrations, there were some or many who became angry with President Bush. But we knew where President Bush stood. You understood him and respected him. This is not a criticism of President Obama. This is just that, you got to stand where you live and stay there. And, but politicians do what politicians have to do to stay popular, to stay whatever. I mean, there's a whole lot of issues. And at some point, leadership, it may not come from the political arena, is I guess what I'm saying. I mean, the changes that we seek may have to come from a different kind of leadership because politicians will have to be politicians. Because as I said, the nature of what they represent. And this is not bad. We need them. We need that leadership. But it's called the art of compromise. Now, as long as you don't compromise on principles, you're all right on various principles. But, I don't know. What I do know is you always have to take the high road, even if others want to take the low road. And I think, I know certainly, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, and I apologize that I'm not able to directly answer, other than to say that I think we have to always take the high road, and folks are going to say what they're going to say. We're not going to get everybody to ever agree 100% to everything that someone says. And if we did, then it would be a dictatorship. So we're not, no one is for a dictatorship. We want people to have discourse. The speaker said something yesterday, I believe, about at least hearing what the other side says, what the Democrats say. And then they got into a brawl about an issue right away after the speaker went and left the floor. But that's politics. So, I don't think we can worry about that. I think we just have to do what we believe is good, just, and right. And ultimately, we will make the changes that need to be made in our nation.
Can I just
Please.
add to
Absolutely.
what Martin just said? I think too many people are focused on change coming from Washington, when the example is that change comes from the people, and that's what the movement was about. It was a people movement that created enough tension and pressure in Washington to cause a Johnson to sign the civil rights legislation and the voting rights legislation. And so with that in mind, this whole industry that you all work in is almost like a godsend. The problem is it's in the words of my father. He said, the children of darkness are often more zealous and determined than the children of light. And so galvanizing people around the healthcare reform or anything else for that fact, who are the children of light, who can frame it within the context of our father's movement, I think could help to drive this. But it will never, as he said, it will never come out of Washington first. You know, the thing that most of us missed when President Obama was elected was not necessarily just his election as the first African American president, it was the message. And the message was, yes, of affirmation. We means us, not me, Obama, or us in Washington, but we the people, can, and then change. So it's gonna take the galvanizing of the people of goodwill, as Daddy would call it, working together and creating that groundswell of continual dialogue. Because you can't stop the dialogue just because there's efforts to undo what's been done. If the people rise up of goodwill and keep that positive dialogue going and the importance of this reform, we can get there. And that's what they had to constantly do in the movement, because they constantly faced opposition that tried to cause them to make steps back or undo something or put a roadblock in the way, etc. But there was this momentum of teaching and training and conversation and dialogue and galvanizing and mobilizing and organizing around things. The brilliance of our father, contrary to what people think, is that he was focused. Yeah, I tell people all the time, he wasn't in Birmingham when he was in Montgomery. I mean, when he was in Montgomery, he was focused on Montgomery. And everywhere he went to speak during that time period, he focused people's attention back to Montgomery. So Montgomery is like, if you look at it this way, it's like this case study. And let's stay focused here. Let's put all our energies here. And as a result, people, you know, in 381 days, we saw, you know, all the forces of good converging and touching the heart some kind of way of the Supreme Court, and things changed. So that's what I was going to add.
Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say it's an honor to be able to be here with both of you. My goodness, it's amazing just to hear your pearls of wisdom. And you spoke about a couple things that your father passed on in terms of his legacy, definitely his humor that you both, you know, are able to pass on. You talked about congruency, what's on the outside, what's on the inside. And you also talked about how, with his staff, they did a lot of training to be able to handle the forces that came at them. And then also the other thing you pointed out was just how he would find the 5% in someone and focus on the good, no matter what came out of them. How do you pass that on to your children and the next generation? And you know, what are the things that you know that you're doing and such, and that you can see in your nieces or nephews or you know your kids, and that you're seeing them in terms of how they're growing in their development thus far?
Well, quite frankly, I went out and I was kind of, much of what happens in my direct life, I have to attribute to my wife. Our daughter is 2.5, and she is dramatically, I'm the only sibling of the three of us remaining that has a child. And, you know, we all understand. I don't know that I truly understood what it meant for a child to be birthed, for God to deliver a child, and until I saw the process. And Bernice happened to be with us when my daughter came into the world. And but because I travel a lot, she spends a considerable amount of time with my wife. And I'm saying that to say, at 2.5 years old, there's this movement song called "I Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around." I can't sing, I'm gonna try. That's right. Turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, or marching down the freedom land. My daughter knows that song. Now, but she acts like that too. I mean, she doesn't let us turn her around either. She has a very strong constitution and is sort of a combination. We named her in honor of my sister Yolanda. Her name is Yolanda Renee, and Yolanda's name was Yolanda Denise. And Yolanda Renee is a combination of my mother and father. And now, the last couple of days, one day she listened to Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday song, and every morning, I took her to school yesterday, and for 45 minutes I had to play the song over and over again. Play Papa's song, Papa's song. Now my point is, the way that we teach and train her, my mom never told any of us that you have to be like your dad or have to be like me. Just be your best self. And that's how my wife and I are raising her. Yolanda Renee, we just want you to be the best. We want you to be kind and compassionate. Yes, you're a king. People treat you very special. Already she's treated in a very special way because she's the only grandchild of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. But she also, it's early, but we're going to raise her with a very strong foundation. My mom raised us with a strong spiritual, moral foundation. We're going to teach her the value of importance of loving, as I said, love yourself, love your family, love your community, and love God. Have a love of God. And the final thing I'll say is that that message that much of what I shared today, absent the humor, I share every time I go into a school system. It would be easy for me to say, I'm against this person or I'm against that person. It'd be easy for either of us to be resentful and hostile and hateful. But we hopefully present an image of love everywhere that we go. We try to shine a positive light. And because you can only lead by example. It would have been awful for my dad and mom to have given their lives, and we were just totally opposite. It's all right for us to be different, but I mean opposite, that we didn't understand nor ever disseminate love. Dad and mom gave their lives to make the nation and world a better place for all of God's children. And not that we have to be like them, but hopefully we are a reflector. We are reflecting what they tried to reflect, and working hard to make this planet in which we live a better place than it was when we arrived. Bernice and I think, had the opportunity to travel with our mom to her undergraduate institution called Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And in Antioch, there's a statue on the campus of the educator Horace Mann. And there's a quote on the bottom of that statue which made an indelible impact on my life. And it says, "Be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity." Now, that sounds grandiose. Quite frankly, what you guys do, perhaps as an industry, is helping to revolutionize and win victories for humanity on a consistent basis. Well, from an individual standpoint, it doesn't have to be a victory for the nation or world. You can win a victory in your neighborhood. You can win a victory in your house of worship. You can win a victory on your block. You can win a victory in your school. You can, yes, win one in your city, yes, maybe in your state, maybe in our nation, and maybe in our world. But be ashamed to die until you've done a little something to make the world in which we all live a little better than it was when you arrived. And that's the kind of energy that, I think we try to disseminate wherever we go, whether we're speaking to children, and particularly when we're speaking to children, or whether we're speaking to adults, or whether we're speaking to seniors or seasoned citizens. As we get older, you guys still young, but some of us are getting in the seasoned category.
I'm in the seasoned category myself, and using a form of social media, Wikipedia, I learned some things about Dr. King's speech. I have a dream today that I didn't know before. One of them I was struck by is this technique he used called Anaphora, which is to repeat a phrase at the beginning of the sentence to lend emphasis and importance to what he was saying. Now is the time, I think, was one of them. And I was thinking maybe there's a LinkedIn equivalent of an anaphora, that there's something that we can do collectively to lend some emphasis or importance and shed some light on your, quest for preserving and extending the legacy of Dr. King. Maybe it's a question we can ask of our members. We do polls. Or maybe it's perhaps a status update. Everybody does a status update, but something we can do collectively and repeatedly to, extend your message and your effort. I don't know if you have any ideas.
That's one of the things I think that Hilda mentioned about a poll.
Yeah, you want to share that? I forget.
I don't remember.
It's a great idea.
But I do think it's a great idea, and connected with that, and this is not fully cooked yet, is finding a way to extract the connections with the economic piece with Dr. King's message. Because we don't hear a lot about that. I mean, it's usually, we think of Dr. King strictly on the race side, but we don't hear a lot about the economic side of things, and his concerns in that regard. So I don't know what that is, but it's something.
We certainly would like to brainstorm
about that.
Like quick.
Yeah.
I mean, well, you all do everything quick anyway, so.
Okay,
So is what I should have said.
ready to start a brainstorming session right now. But, Dan?
Hi, thank you very much for being here. It's an honor.
Dan, should we stack two of those mics on top of one another to reach you? Holy smokes.
I have a
Wow.
perhaps simple question, but you mentioned the importance of love and the importance of giving back in a community, changing the world in some small way. And you also mentioned we're going through economic crises, war, lots of intolerance in the world. My question is, how do any of us maintain optimism in the face of adversity?
Well, I think from my perspective, maintaining optimism is something of the essence of my being. So regardless of whatever else is going on in the world that can be perceived and realistically negative, I have to always find and to try to find the good. I think, our dad often said, he used to talk about how the nation was a sick nation, but he was grounded. I think first of all you have to have a grounding. His was spiritual. Again, I'm not trying to suggest that that's what one has to do. I can just say what worked in our family, and I know that there were times when he gave in one of his messages in Montgomery, he talked about how his grounding was and his connection was to God. So when he was in Montgomery, one night at midnight, he got a call, he said, and it was a call from a person that told him, Martin Luther King Jr., in essence, you better be out of town by a certain time or we're going to kill your wife and daughter. And, he was a new minister in town. And he basically said, I didn't have anyone to call. He said, I had to get down on my knees. First of all, it shook him because he had gotten calls constantly, threats. People would call our home. I mean, even as late as the late 60s, people would call. And people would make nasty threats. But he said this one really shook him up. And he said that he went into the kitchen and sat down to drink some coffee. And he said he sat down and really prayed and said, this ugly voice almost really destroyed me. And he said he prayed and he said he heard a voice that he described as God saying, Martin Luther King, stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, stand up and know that I will be with you even until the end of time. And those words, sometimes you have to look inward and find it yourself. And as I said, you know how we see people all the time who always seem to be so optimistic, and you want some of that energy. You want to say, man, I want to get something. What is it? Let me figure out how can you manufacture it? I mean, ideally, it would be wonderful if that could happen. But certainly, it is what we choose as our surroundings that helps us to become, who we are. And so, sometimes I'm disappointed in what I see in younger people. Of course, I'm disappointed in what I see in older people too sometimes. But, I'm bothered by it. But yet I don't let that deter me, because then I will see another young person who comes along, and that person is really making phenomenal change in the community and the nation and the world. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Somehow we've got to share this story. People overcome odds that just don't seem to make sense. And those are the stories that we've got to find a way to get out more, because that's where a lot of people in our society live. They live in this negative sphere. And yet there are those individuals who've lived in a negative sphere that have been able to overcome, and you would never know it. And those are the stories that we need to tell, because that will inspire others to say, oh, you know what? Gosh, if you've done this and you overcame, then certainly I can. I always thought our story was not so much complex, but it was somewhat difficult. I mean, losing a father in the 60s was certainly hard. And then our grandmother, and then my father's brother, who I didn't say, mysteriously drowned in 1969, a year after my dad. So we lost 3 loved ones in a very short period of time. Now, quite frankly, we all know one thing, that no matter whether you know it or not, when you know or not, and what I mean by that is, no one wants to focus on the fact that at some point none of us are going to be here. That's real. We want to focus on the important and the joy that we receive by interacting with our friends and our family. But when a loved one is taken from you at an early age, it certainly that was the most devastating moment at 10 years old that I can remember. And at 5 years old, Bernice was 5, and Dexter was 7, and Yolanda was 12. For our father, we're watching the news that evening in our living room, and it comes across the screen, Martin Luther King Jr. has just been shot. And it's like, oh my God, what does that mean? But somehow there is trouble that comes to all of our lives. It's not the trouble, it's how we're going to always fall down, as the song says, but you got to get back up. I mean, like somebody told me one time that if I was to hit any of you, I wouldn't do it, but if I was to, and knock you down on the floor, well, that's on me. I shouldn't have done that. But if I come back 3 days later and you're still there, that's on you. So, if you fall down, you got to get up. I don't know if that answers it.
Okay, we got time for one more, and then I know we have a hard stop. We got to get them on their way.
So there's a term called slacktivism. It's kind of a combination of the word slacker with activism, and it describes a kind of action that's actually really easy and really common in today's modern culture. That is an action that is both really convenient and lightweight, as well as meaningless in the actual world. An example of this might be like joining a fan page or wearing a bracelet. This is kind of in contrast to the things that I feel like your family has been doing for years and years, which are truer forms of real social activism. And so my question is, as gatekeepers of a social network and a communications channel, how can we make it so that slacktivism doesn't kind of water down real forms of the activism that you guys have been doing?
Wow.
Yeah,
That's one of
you
those.
probably already had an answer, right? You just kind of.
Woo!
Any insight? Ding, ding, ding.
Wow. I think one of the things is going to come out of what this relationship ends up being, because part of that is a lack of education around activism, and we know there are different forms. You don't want to put out the fire of people who may do it that way. But what you're saying is at the same time, you don't want to diminish the more frontline part of it. And we've got to it's a balancing act, because there were, if you want to look at it back in the day, there were slacktivists too. I mean, the ones who passed out leaflets were slacktivists, but their role was nonetheless just as critical. So it's utilizing an institution that helped to, not the institution, but the person that is named after, that helped to kind of propel activism to the forefront in this nation, and teaching people about the various forms of activism. Again, the key is in the people. And there are people out there who are more of those frontline, grassroots, and not in a negative way or in a denigrating way, but an in-your-face kind of person. And so we just have to figure out how to bring these worlds together so that that platform can be put out there, even to have that kind of discussion, that what we want to do is to bring a balancing to all of this, because you need that, you need all of it to really transform the world that we live in. Now, you all have to deal with the practical.
So we would be honored to brainstorm. We would be honored to collaborate and figure out the best ways to take your message and the legacy forward. It would be a true privilege. On behalf of LinkedIn, I remember when the president was going to be inaugurated, there was a lot of talk of your father because of the timing, the date. I had a chance to go back and watch the I Have a Dream speech, and it just leaves you breathless. The words, the energy, the fact that it's able to come through a small video like that on YouTube decades later just speaks to the power of what he stood for. His image in a presentation, his words, whether read or recited, they just move people, they touch us all. And to have you here today in our presence, we are just so honored and so appreciated. So thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.